TETRA, maybe some of you already know, is the Terrestrial Trunked Radio algorithm. Wouter and Jos already held the talk last year at 37C3 about TETRA Burst. Maybe the people who already know or are deeper in this topic can raise their hands, please. Quite a lot of people, thank you very much. So TETRA is the radio signaling algorithm for federal agencies, police, fire departments, and critical infrastructure. It uses encryption. And last year, TETRA Burst was presented at 37C3, where T1 and T3 and some other things in the protocol were broken. TETRA uses proprietary encryption. As you know, proprietary encryption can oppose a lot of difficulties because no one can look at the encryption like AES or 3DES as it was 30 years ago. Now we will hand over to Wouter and Jos. Have fun.
All right, thank you for that. So, welcome everyone to our talk, Can Glue Mend the Burst? A first look at the TETRA algorithm set B. My name is Jos Wetzels, and this is my colleague, Wouter Boxlock. And together with Carlo Meijer, who's in the audience and just gave the fax hacking talk, we form Midnight Blue, a specialist security consultancy firm from the Netherlands that focuses on high-end security research, mainly in critical infrastructure. And you may know us from our previous research onto TETRA, which was presented last year at CCC, but we've also focused on everything from car immobilizers, the BlackBerry QNX operating system, to the MyFair Classic RFID system. So, a brief recap for those of you who've never heard of TETRA. TETRA is a globally used radio technology that competes with the likes of P25, DMR or Tetrapol. It was standardized in 1995 by the European Standards Organization ETSI, who are known for their work on GSM, 3G, 4G and so on. TETRA is used for conventional voice communications in handheld radios, but also for data communications in machine-to-machine contexts. Now, it relies, or rather we should say relied, on secret proprietary cryptography, which we reverse engineered and published last year and showed some issues in. Now, for a little bit of an idea around the global impact, TETRA is the leading standard for law enforcement, so chances if you see police officers somewhere in the world using a handheld radio, it's likely that they're using TETRA. But it's also used in some military contexts, in some intelligence agency context, and it's very popular with critical infrastructure, including in Germany. So it's used in these contexts for SCADA wide area networks, such as the control of electrical substations, pipeline control, but also railway signaling, especially for light rail and metro systems. And you'd be surprised how much of the critical infrastructure in Europe actually runs on top of these TETRA networks. And most of the security comes down to whatever TETRA offers. Very, very little of these institutions take the effort to layer additional security on top of it, especially because they assumed that the cryptography would be sound. Now, in our previous research called TETRA Burst, we presented the first public security analysis of TETRA in 20 years. We uncovered multiple weaknesses, some at the protocol level, and including a backdoor in one of the algorithms, which tends to be the case with proprietary cryptography. We published these previously secret primitives, and we went over the different use cases of TETRA, the different kind of vulnerabilities, and their potential impacts. Now, this research had some follow-up. It was widely covered in the news media, both the cybersecurity news media as well as the general news media, and it renewed the debate on proprietary cryptography. Parallel to our efforts, the ETSI organization started a new standard upgrade to TETRA with some new cryptographic primitives. And during our initial discussions with ETSI, they indicated they wanted to keep these primitives secret again, which we advised against. Now, when this research came out, there was quite a bit of public backlash, including from the member and usage organizations, police organizations, etc., who use these technologies. And ETSI pledged to publish the specs and make them public for inspection at some unknown date in the future, which led to the statement you can see on the left where they claim transparency is at the root of ETSI. So in this talk, we take a look at several new aspects of the TETRA standard and see whether the TETRA update is suitable for its envisioned multi-decade future. Because while this technology has the air of legacy around it, ETSI itself envisions TETRA being used at least until the 2030s or the 2040s, and there are many of these networks that have large investments, so they won't disappear tomorrow. We will discuss the published materials, the new ciphers, we will present a preliminary analysis of the improvements, and we will discuss some of the context, the tangents, and the teasers of our new research. So for a little bit of an introduction, very high level, to TETRA security, the original suite was composed of two main pillars. The TAA1 suite, which is used for authentication, key management and distribution, identity encryption, and remote disabling of terminals, and uses 128-bit keys. And then there is the TEA, the TETRA encryption algorithm suite, which is used for voice and data encryption, the so-called air interface encryption. And this is composed of 4 different ciphers with different kinds of exportability use cases. The first one is TA1, which is readily exportable to whoever wants to use it, and this was the one that turned out to have a backdoor. Then there is TA2, which is used for European public safety organizations. Then there is TA3, which is for public safety organizations in countries that are not part of the European Union, but have good relationships with them. And then there is TA4, which was meant to be a replacement for TA1, but is hardly used, if at all. And all of these ciphers use 80-bit keys. Now, the new additions to the standard were introduced as follows. ETSI had a statement saying ETSI secures critical infrastructure against cyber quantum attacks with new TETRA algorithms. So we'll inspect whether that's completely adequate. And this again consists of 2 pillars. On the one hand, you have the authentication suite, TAA2, with new primitives for authentication and key distribution. And then there's the TEA algorithm set B, where you have 3 new algorithms. The first of which is TA5, to be used for European public safety in replacement for the TEA2 cipher. Then there's TA6, which is the extra European public safety use case and used as a replacement for TA3. And then there's TA7, which is meant to be readily exportable and meant to be the replacement for the backdoored TA1. Now, ETSI did announce that TA7 again would be weakened. So instead of the full key length, they announced this will have an effective key length of 56-bit. So regardless of what the next discussions will show, I think it's a little bit harsh to claim that this is cyber quantum attack resistant. So, and there's some other improvements to the standard as well that we'll discuss. So just based on the initially public documents, let's briefly go over some of the changes the new standard has over its predecessor. Now, we find that the authentication features a very similar structure for the mutual authentication between a radio and the infrastructure as the old algorithm, but in this case they use 192-bit keys, so that's an upgrade. They use a different cryptographic primitive, and they also don't use the TB primitives anymore. These were primitives that were used to stitch some of the cryptographic components together. They had flaws that we managed to exploit for some vulnerabilities, so this is an improvement, but we won't delve into the authentication today. That's a subject for another day. Now, when we look at the encryption, we can see that they still use stream ciphers, and they have some small improvements in the structure. So on the left, you can see the old structure. On the right, you can see the new structure. And here we can see that the key, CK, is no longer combined with network information. Instead, this information is now added to the IV, the initialization vector. And this is an improvement, as an attacker would previously know exactly in which few bits the key would differ between 2 different cells, due to the modification by this simplistic TB5 function. And this was a cryptanalytic risk that's been addressed in this particular structure. Now, what we really hoped for and tried to get across in some of our discussions with ETSI is that the revised standard should have proper cryptographic integrity guarantees. In the old standard, TETRA had no cryptographic integrity guarantees on most of the signaling. They just used non-cryptographic CRCs. In the new standard, this has not been addressed, unfortunately. Messages are still unauthenticated and traffic is still malleable. And this, in our eyes, is a major failing, a major shortcoming, and leaves the door open to some attacks that could have been addressed with this update. Unfortunately, this did not happen. So this, even if you migrate to the new cipher-suites, these two issues will still be there until, let's say, the end of days. Now, identity encryption also got an update. In the old standard, the TA61 algorithm was used to encrypt identities, and this provided some pseudonymity. So if you have a TETRA phone number, let's say, you wouldn't directly see the phone number over the air. You had a pseudonymous version. We found some vulnerabilities in this algorithm, broke it, which allowed us to de-anonymize users of this network. In the new standard, this algorithm is removed, and identities are now encrypted using a regular air traffic encryption key stream. The TEA 5, 6, or 7 ciphers. And this provides anonymity, so this is an upgrade indeed. One little footnote, there's a sort of transition mode, and this allows for networks to simultaneously support old and new generation TETRA devices, because people don't generally update all their fleets of radios all at once because it's very expensive, or you have networks that cover large countries where procurement of radios is done by different police departments. You need to support different populations. And as a result, you have networks where you have all the new devices living together, and not all features will be supported. So that means that even if you have new handsets and you use them on these kind of mixed networks, you will use the old identity encryption scheme. Now, this is not a topic for today, because it has many different pitfalls. There's many foot guns involved here. So if you have any questions about this, we suggest you talk to us after the talk, or reach out to us through email. Now, looking at the document release, ETSI released the documents in a batch of 4 different documents, the first of which is the original algorithm set A, the second of which covers the new algorithms, and then there were the authentication algorithms in 2 separate documents. Now, what was really lacking here is that none of these documents had any reference implementation at all. And they also didn't include cryptographic test factors. So even if you came up with your own implementation, you had no way to validate, am I implementing it correctly? Is it behaving as expected? So there's a lot of room for implementers to mess up here. It's very hard for auditors to validate whether what they got is the right thing. And we'll see later on why this becomes a problem. That's something we'll cover in detail. So with that, let's look at the published primitives. And for that, I'd like to give the word to Wouter.
Thank you. Thanks. So the first thing I wanted to look at, because I was curious, is TA4. TA4 was the last one of the original suite of keystream generator functions that we could not reverse engineer out of a radio, because in practice it's barely used anywhere. And TA4 is known to be freely exportable, so it didn't really come as a surprise to see that the key register has been reduced from the 80-bit key to 56 bits. Which is definitely weak, definitely easy to attack, still a bit stronger than the backdoor TA1, which is actually used in practice and has an effective security of 32 bits. And when I looked further to investigate the S-box that's used in that algorithm, I found some very iffy scans of an S-box that was just not readable. Now, once again, this is not really a problem. There's no real need to implement TA4 other than to satisfy my own completionism, but it did make me wonder how this made it to an official standards document. When we look at TA 5, 6, and 7, so the new generation keystream generators, we see that they all share a very similar structure, consisting of 3 functions. First, there is an IV expansion function, which expands the 80-bit IV to 192 bits. Then there is a combining function, which takes this extended IV together with the cipher key and generates a mode IV and a mode key, which are then used later on in the Rijndael encryption step. And here a plain text block is generated, and the mode key is used to encrypt the plain text. You get a ciphertext, which is then used as keystream. So it's stored into the message to encrypt or decrypt the message. And the IV expand and the Rijndael encrypt are identical between the three ciphers. It's only the combining function F that really differs. So let's go through the steps in a little more detail. The IV expansion takes this initial 80-bit initialization vector, which, as Jos mentioned, contains the network time and contains the frequency on which the communication takes place, and some other of this information is embedded in there. And in 20 steps, it generates a new byte each time, and the last 192 bits that are generated are then taken as the extended IV, the IVX. And this is good because the IV between messages may look a lot like the previous one. So you will know exactly in which position a bit has flipped, and only very few bits will actually have changed, which is a cryptanalytical risk. And by executing these 20 steps, you get an IVX that is vastly different from the previous one. Now, do note that the IVX is not secret. It's just derived from the IV, but mixed up. The next step is the combining function F. And this takes this IVX, the extended IV, and the cipher key, and takes the first nibble, so the first 4 bits of both, and looks up in a table which value is there. So it's used as an index in a table. And what is there is then the first nibble for the IVM, the mode IV, and the mode key. So it's a nibble-by-nibble process. They're completely separate from each other, and it's implemented as a lookup table. And lastly, the mode key is used to encrypt a plaintext block with Rijndael. Rijndael is very much related to AES, except that AES has a fixed block size, so you always have these 16-byte blocks. And Rijndael allows you to pick a block size that's suitable for you. And in this case, it uses 256-bit blocks. So this takes the that's a typo, CKM as a key. It creates a plaintext block, encrypts it, and that's the key stream with which the traffic is then encrypted. Now, we know that TA7 is going to have a weakening in its structure, and TA6, as it is the predecessor of TA3, warrants heightened attention. We found some weird stuff in TA3, more on that later, by the way. So we want to take a good look at it to see if there's any weird stuff going on. So how do you search for intentional weakening in such a structure? Well, you look at the differences between the 3 algorithms, because TA5, used for European security and emergency services, should be fine. And the only difference is in the combining function F. So let's take a better look at how this combining function looks and see if we can spot the problem. So if you have a CK and you have an IVX, then you take a nibble of both, you put them together, and you get an index. So in this case, we get an index of D5. And we then look into the table that is suitable for this specific algorithm, and we take whichever value is found at that index. And those 8 bits are then split into 2 again, and you get 1 nibble for your CKM, your mode key, and 1 nibble for your IVM, the mode IV. So this is repeated for all the 48 nibbles that these kinds of keys consist of, and you end up with your mode key and IV. Now, this is the table that implements that mapping for TA7. Now, you're smart guys, so is there anyone who spots something weird here? No? All right, I'll tell you then. If you take a look at a column, you see that the first 4 bits, like the first character of each column, can only have a few options. So the one I highlighted, you can have a 0 or a 2 or a 7, but there is no 4, there's no 1. So there is only very few options that you can retrieve from that column. And note that the IVX, which is the thing that determines in which column we will be looking, is public information. So if you try to crack this algorithm, you will know the IVX. So you will know that the index, in this case, for computing a particular nibble, will end with a 5. So the 5th column are the options for your mode IV and your mode key. And as the first nibble is the one that determines the mode key, there is a huge key reduction here. In this particular case, the CKM nibble can be 2, because there's 8 entries that map to a 2. It could also be 7. There's 7 entries that map to a 7. And then there is only 1 entry that maps... Oh, my bad. It can be a 0, 7 entries for that. And there's only 1 entry that maps to a 7. So the key nibble may become a 7, but it's very unlikely. So with 16 options for our original crypto key, we only get 3 options for the mode key that's derived off of it. So let's do the math. If we have 3 options for 48 nibbles, because that's the full length of the key we are deriving, then you get an attack complexity of approximately 2 to the power of 76. That's way better than 2 to the power of 192, but it's still a lot and on the verge of practicality for even reasonably well-funded adversaries. So what we need to do is incorporate the fact that one of these 3 options is very unlikely. There is one value that has only a chance of 1 in 16 of actually becoming the value for this piece of the key. And if you go through the search space in order of likeliness, then you will hit the correct key much earlier. Usually after 2 to the 56 tries, you will be able to identify the proper key. Now, that's expected, because 2 to the 56 is the reduction that is mandatory for crypto to be freely exportable. But there is room for a nice speedup here. On this figure, you can see the probability distribution of the number of these improbable nibbles. We have 48 nibbles, and for each of them, there's a chance of 1 in 16 that it gets this one improbable value. And with a chance of 15 in 16, it will just be between 2 values. And we can thus make a bit of an optimistic assumption here, and that is that the one we are looking at will not have any of these improbable nibbles. And that doesn't happen too often. Usually there's 2 or 3, but with a chance of about 4.5%, that will indeed be the case. So in that case, the search complexity drops down to only 2 to the power of 48. Now there's one more problem here, and that is that we need a distinguisher. We may have the proper guess for our mode key, for the CKM, but we need to be able to establish whether this guess is correct or not. And that's not trivial, because even if we have the mode key, we don't have the plaintext block, because the plaintext block is also derived from the cipher key. So we cannot just encrypt a block using our guessed key and see if the key stream that comes out matches what we have seen on the network. So we need to do something else. And what we do is make use of the fact that it's a Rijndael encryption. So that's a reversible operation. So instead of trying to construct the plaintext and encrypting it, we simply take a segment of key stream that we recover of the network. Say there is a large message that passes by and we know the contents, then we can find the key stream that was generated and decrypt it with our guessed key. And if it decrypts to something that says TEA7 followed by a block index, then we know that our guess for the key was the correct one. And as a bonus, we also recover our IVM, because that's the start of this decrypted message then. Now, the full TEA7 attack with this speedup trick would look as follows. You obtain a 256-bit known keystream block. You make the optimistic assumption that there is no of these improbable nibbles in there. You try all 2 to the power of 48 CKM guesses, and you check if any of them decrypts to the TEA7 string and the all-zero block index that should be in the plaintext block. If that's true, then you can trivially recover the CK, the original crypto key, and then you can decrypt all traffic that's encrypted with that key. So not just this message, you can decrypt anything. And if it's not found, then you just get yourself another key stream, because if you can get one, you usually can get more. That sounds like a reasonable assumption. And if you can gather 16, you already have a more than 50% chance of having one that has none of these improbable nibbles, and you only have to do a computation of 2 to the power of 52, which is quite a lot faster. Now, if we keep that in mind and we look at the other algorithms, we can make a nice comparison. So what you see here is that if we know the value of an IVX nibble, we can see which options for the mode key can be generated and which options just cannot follow from that. So the dots designate values for the key nibble that cannot happen. And you can very clearly see the reduction happening here. If you look at TA5, which is intended for law enforcement and emergency services, you see a perfect one-to-one mapping. So there's no key reduction going on here. And when we looked at TA6, we found a single flipped bit, which is very weird. It's in theory a small reduction on the key size, but probably not enough to really mount an attack on. But it reminded us of TA3, which had a similar flip bit in a weird location. However, a week or two ago, we were given by some other researchers an updated version of the specification, version 1.1.2. And to the best of my knowledge, this version is still not public yet, but yeah, well, someone gave it to us. And apparently there were typos in the tables. So that's interesting. Also, there is now a proper scan of TEA4, so they have improved their standards, I guess. It goes to show that publishing a specification like this without reference implementation and without even test factors is just not much to go on and not very useful. Now, I briefly mentioned TEA3, and I'd like to update you on the progress on its cryptanalysis. When we published our work last year, we drew your attention to the fact that there are some suspicious design choices going on. There is a table that has a duplicate entry, and any cryptographer will tell you that this is not going to help and is probably going to weaken the strength of the cipher. Now, TA3, as Jos mentioned, is intended for emergency services outside of Europe, but for countries with good relations. So you will not want to give them something that's blatantly backdoored, obviously. We advised caution and we asked for scrutiny on this algorithm. And in the last month, we have been working with some absolute world-class cryptographers who were kind enough to include us in the process of performing cryptanalysis on TEA3. And what we found is actually the same as some other independent researchers. We found some similar conclusions, and that is that there is more to this algorithm. There is more structural weaknesses that open the door for attack. Now, there's no practical attack yet, but this is probably not over yet, and I'll show you what I mean. So the key register of TA3, which is shown at the top, is an 80-bit register. And due to its structure, you can make an alternative representation of this register. You can split it into two separate 40-bit registers that open the door for attacking them separately. If you can just guess this base register correctly, the stream that goes to the state register, which is not shown here, is extremely related regardless of the value of the second 40-bit register. So this should definitely not exist. This should not be here. And this opens the door for being able to attack this in 2 separate parts. So I think we will hear more of this in the future. Now, a few closing thoughts. Brief summary of the state of cryptography in TETRA. A year ago we showed you guys that TA1 is broken, that TA3 is suspicious, it's just gotten more suspicious, and TA4, since it's also export grade, is also broken. Now we can add that TA7 is broken because it's export grade. It's even a bit more broken than originally anticipated, possibly. TA6 is probably okay. I'm assuming that the typos are fixed now and that the next typo fix will not introduce a weakness. Authentication in TA1, the old standard, had some minor issues that seem to be resolved in the new standard, but we didn't look into it into any detail. The traffic anonymity has been improved with the side mark that if you have this transition mode enabled, then you will not benefit of the renewed encryption mechanism for identities. And very unfortunately, integrity guarantees are still not there. Individual signaling messages are not protected against tampering. Some brief thoughts about Wassenaar, because Wassenaar is apparently the reason that we need to reduce the security of cryptographic primitives that we use in critical infrastructure, that we use all over Europe and outside. Wassenaar contains exceptions for certain kinds of crypto. There's exceptions for public crypto. We can all use our HTTPS secured internet banking. There's exceptions for civil use. There's exceptions for connected civil industry applications. So I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me that there should be room for using proper crypto on these kinds of high-value networks. So the question remains whether TA7 will find its way to serious applications like critical infrastructure. This is what happened with TA1. I hope we have been able to contribute to preventing that from happening again, because now at least it's clear on beforehand. And I'd like to end with a small teaser, if you will. There is still this concept of end-to-end encryption, which is an additional layer of encryption on top of the air interface encryption that TETRA offers. And while it's not really part of the TETRA standard, the standard offers some guidelines on how it can be integrated, and the manufacturer associations have developed actual implementations for this and standards that are obviously not public. It's an expensive solution, it's an opaque solution, no one is allowed to know how it works. Yeah, we're trying to look into this, and I'm pretty sure we will be talking again soon in some time. So that's all for today. Thank you very much for your attention. If you feel like contributing, go ahead. Thank you. If you want to contribute, there is open source projects. You can take a look at crypto. General questions are always welcome. If you're using TETRA, please make sure you understand the pitfalls of this technology, perform proper risk analysis. Don't just rely on your vendor. We've had multiple reports of vendors informing their customers incorrectly. Contact us when in doubt. And as a general lesson, if you have these large, opaque technology stacks, keep hitting them with a stick. Be very sure that you know what kind of surprises could be in there. And thank you for your attention again.
Thank you very much again for the nice insights. A little bit terrifying. Are there any questions from the audience? We have 6 microphones. 1 in the lower end, 2 in the lower end, 2 in the upper end, and 2 in the middle of the room. I don't see any questions. Sorry. Number 3, please.
Hello, nice work. You mentioned at the beginning that anonymity is provided by encrypting the static identifier with a key.
Yeah.
Is it a static key?
Mm-hmm. In the old revision of the TETRA standards, the identity was encrypted with a network key, the CCK or SCK, and the encryption that number would then be used over and over again. So if you see such a number, you can track between messages that the same device is being addressed, but you cannot see the proper phone number that's behind it. Although during authentications, often you can see an unencrypted identity changing into an encrypted one, like, okay, which ones would go together, and then you can still find out. That's in the old standard.
Can I use the encryption of the unknown identifier or guest identifier to the anonymous identifier to reveal the key or gain information about the key?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Okay, maybe I can guess a list of identifiers that are static, and I can observe the encrypted identifier, so I have a pair of known plaintext and ciphertext.
Yeah, so we found an attack against this because this encryption scheme is it's like a very small encryption scheme, just 2 rounds basically. So indeed, by matching encrypted with unencrypted ones, you can derive a secret. Then you can instantly de-anonymize traffic. I'm not completely sure if that answers your question, but if not, drop by and I'm sure I can explain it to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, some questions from the internet, please.
The internet wants to know if you are aware of any cases where the weak encryption was used by a criminal organization to spy on the police or find out any information, something like that.
I mean, this is not something we were made privy to, obviously. It's not unfeasible. I mean, in our previous presentation last year, we showed some cases from the leaked Snowden documents where we saw state-sponsored actors intercepting traffic communications, TETRA communications from other states. I've heard stories from various sources about states actively targeting TETRA. We've not heard criminal organizations targeting this, but yeah, that's something that could happen.
Thank you very much. I see a question on the left middle.
Okay, so did you manage to find any more structure in the lookup table it's using in the scheme that appears to be secure? Or is it just like a random Latin square or something like that?
Structure in what exactly? Which primitive?
The lookup table that you're attacking in one of the other schemes. In the scheme it's secure.
The TA7 one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no real need for any more structure. I don't believe it was generated based on a mathematical function or something. I think it's just a random mapping that they then adapted to only have a few, like a few options for the derived key. I have talked to the original designer of some of the earlier algorithms, and he just made random permutations until one had the properties that he liked it to have. So that's not a bad approach, in my opinion. I mean, mathematical structures have side effects, and that's that they are mathematical structures. So yeah, I think this was just a random mapping.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think no questions from the internet anymore. Then I don't see the number. Yes, you, please.
Thank you. Why do you think the reason is that there is not some competition in the sector of renewing TETRA network? Someone could say, for example, okay, I'm going to create a company and I'm going to do this correctly. We all know that it is doing some shenanigans, so I'm going to do proper cryptography and try to sell it to states who are sovereign and can buy whatever they want, right?
Well, I mean, it's obviously, it's possible to make your own radio system, but then you're competing not only with a standard that has been rubber stamped by a well-respected standards body, or at least used to be, but you're also competing with major manufacturers, parties like Motorola, parties like Hitera, parties like Airbus. It's very hard to enter a market where the other players are parties that are so entrenched in the government procurement processes. So regardless of the standard, coming along with a good technology, with good encryption, is probably not enough to acquire market dominance. So really, we should be looking at the processes that create these standards, ensure that these are optimal, and then essentially force the vendors that implement these things to follow a proper standard rather than trying to come in from the side. I don't think that's a very fruitful approach.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions, but I think feel free to get in touch with them. Thank you very much again for the nice insights. A big applause, please. Thank you.